Here we go. It's time for another episode of Meraki Unboxed. My name's Simon Thompson, at Meraki Simon on Twitter. Welcome back. And today we're going to have a conversation with Tony. Tony's in the room. Hi, Tony.
Hi, Simon. Hi, everybody.
Hey. I'm really excited about this one today because we're going to get into some very interesting discussion about some of the stuff that underlies everything that's different about Meraki. We've talked about simplicity on some of the previous episodes. We've talked about some of the products. None of those actually work without this very fundamental thing that sits at the center of it all called the Meraki Cloud. So we're going to get into some of that in a few moments. Just a quick preamble before we get going. Meraki Unboxed is a podcast we've been running now for a couple of months. We already have several episodes in the bag and some great content if you are interested in learning more about Meraki, not just the products and features, but also the way we do things, what makes us tick here. You can go back and review, of course, those anytime at all. And we're really trying to make sure that this evolves in a good, healthy direction which works for you. So I'm really encouraging you to reach out with feedback. You can do that through the Meraki community, or you can ping me directly on Twitter. Remember, that's at Meraki Simon. And speaking of Twitter, we've got another Twitter user here. Tony, you use it as well, don't you?
Yeah, that's true. So I'm Tony_Meraki. So at Tony_Meraki on Twitter.
There he is. Look him up. And, well, that's where you get the real wisdom, folks. Right?
Yeah, well, we'll see. We'll leave that up to you, the audience.
Okay, let's get things rolling. So today, as I said, Tony's going to talk to us about the cloud and the APIs that we have at Meraki as well. This is a relatively new development for us here at Cisco Meraki. We've been doing this for a couple of years now, but we're really starting to get into it and investing in it a lot more heavily because we really recognize this as the future of this kind of technology where it integrates with other platforms around it. So we want to get into that kind of discussion. But before we get going on the meat of today, let's start off with a quick recap. Tony, tell us a little bit about you and your background at Meraki.
Sure, Simon. So first of all, thanks so much for the invite. It's an honor to be here on Meraki Unboxed, and hello there to everybody. And just a quick background, like Simon said, name's Tony Carmichael. I am the API product manager here at Meraki, so I look after our APIs, services, as well as our developer platform. And I have been at Meraki for some time. So I actually joined back in about February 2011. So it's been a good 8 years. And I've gotten the opportunity through various different places within the business to make what I think is a big impact. Got to work on the marketing side, the sales side, as well as the product side. So I had a pretty awesome experience here at Meraki so far.
Yeah, and 8 years is that's a pretty good record. And
well, in the Bay Area,
especially in the Bay Area,
yeah.
Amazing at the moment. There's so much turnover happening, but that's awesome. And there must be something about this place that you love.
For sure. I mean, at the end of the day, more than anything, I love being a customer advocate and being able to listen to not just what our customers are looking for in a modern networking and IT portfolio, but being able to actually, be an effective change, right? Being able to actually contribute to that in various forms. That has been more motivating than anything and kept me around in Meraki for sure.
Sweet. And so we're going to focus on what you're really working on today. We want to dive into that in a little bit more detail. But I know Tony has a lot of experience, as he said, through various different aspects of this business and also very much on the product side. So a deep understanding of really the world of building networks and the kind of challenges that the network engineers out there face. Before we get into some of that side of things, let's level set a little bit. So for those who are maybe relatively new to Meraki or relatively new to this concept still of the cloud being at the center of a networking technology business, when you think of cloud, we often think of apps that we're using like Google, Office 365. But now we're talking about it in terms of infrastructure. So maybe, Tony, just tell us a little bit about the architecture that supports everything we do at Meraki and why we think it's the way to go.
Yeah, of course. So, we're Simon, you're touching on the fact that we're really continuing to innovate rapidly and putting a lot of energy into our infrastructure, our cloud, and the architecture behind what makes Meraki simple, elegant, but powerful. But the reality is that we've been doing that for over a decade. What's changed is the market. And the evolution of how most customers, maybe 10 years ago, they wouldn't have been as comfortable with the idea of cloud connected technologies for their core infrastructure. And of course, in many cases, that has completely 180'd. More and more now, it feels like it's reached a critical mass or mainstream, so to speak, and across retail, hospitality, and even environments that were historically completely air-gapped from the internet.
Yeah.
There's enough of a business driver now. Take a manufacturing floor, for example, that, I think the traditional thought is, hey, that doesn't have any business talking to the internet, but there's enough of a business driver or leadership is wanting to take and learn from how, those systems are working. That is kind of a tipping point for these companies to now start to move and shift their entire infrastructure to a cloud-based or hybrid architecture. In terms of Meraki, our products from day one have been, born in the cloud, as we like to say. And in its most simple form, this means that our devices are, zero touch. You plug them in, they connect and communicate securely to our backend or our cloud infrastructure, which is really, it lives across the world in data centers. Meraki owns and operates this infrastructure through and through. And again, by doing this, we are able to deliver on our core mission of simplicity. So this delights customers because it means that you can plug in a device the same way that some of us out there, as we start to bring connected and IoT type devices into our homes. Take, for example, a Nest camera from Google or an Amazon Echo from Amazon. These devices are actually very similar to the way Meraki devices work in that they check in, they identify themselves, they say, here I am, and our cloud, or in this example, our Meraki's cloud, just says, hey, here's how you should be configured, here's how you should be set up. And of course, it's also pulling information and statistics from those devices.
Right, and it does updates as well, right? I think my Google Home is, apart from the fact that it's always answering me even when I don't want it to, it is getting better all the time. Yeah. It is learning, and the software is being updated in the background, so it's pretty awesome.
Yeah, and there's benefits beyond the obvious there. We want to drill this point of using the example of Google Home or an Amazon Echo too much. But one thing that, as you just said, these are learning devices, right? So because of the nature that they're connected and they're able to use, elastic backend compute and storage and such, these devices can learn, they can grow, and they can delight, right? Because all of a sudden there's a new feature there that wasn't there that you might not even have thought to ask. Similarly at Meraki, we often look at, metadata that exists across our entire infrastructure. Simple example, how many clients are there connected all across the world, and what kinds of clients? And this can then really inform the next generation of products that we produce. And those could be software features, those could be new hardware products.
This is I think this is a really important part of the discussion because we can get stuck into talking about the cloud as just this clever architectural solution. But what really matters is what the impact of that is for customers. And so for people who are choosing this approach, it's not just that it's another way of creating a switch or an access point or any other piece of infrastructure. It's that there are actual tangible additional benefits that you derive as an end customer. And you touched on product development as well as another angle on that. So I think it's really important to be calling those out.
Yeah, I mean, take traffic analysis, which is a feature that we've had for many years as an example, right? I mean, every day it feels like a new software application showing up, mostly cloud-based solutions now. If you look at Atlassian in the workspace and how quickly they're growing to be one of the more popular software applications for enterprise, our products can already self-identify and fingerprint different applications and give you a weighted distribution on how much this traffic is being seen on the network versus that traffic. But by virtue of having a cloud-based solution, Meraki can continue to iteratively introduce these new applications without you having to touch a thing. You don't have to add new IPs, no new ports, no protocols. It just shows up. The new fingerprints are there, and this new application type or an existing one that changed its protocol, it just shows up and gets updated dynamically. Right. That's just a very simple example here.
Yeah, and it's also testament to the fact that stuff that used to be hard has gotten easier over time, and we've been able to deliver a lot of functionality that really just operationally was much more challenging previously. The thing I think of here, when I think of my own background, I was a network engineer way back. I'm not even going to tell the folks on this thing. We were talking about it before we started.
Simon, I won't say.
Before we pressed the record button, I was saying how long ago it is. It's long enough that I had to take every single switch I was going to deploy out of a box physically, put it on a desk, and I had to go and find a console cable. I had to go and download the appropriate firmware and make sure every single switch was set up with the same level of firmware so that they could talk to each other. And that was before I even started installing it in racks and providing service. So that operationally added huge amounts of time and effort. And anybody who has actually done this, and I'm sure many of you listening will have done it, that console cable is never there. You can never find it when you actually need it, or you've lent it to somebody and they forgot to give it back to you. All of that's it's all history, right?
It's all history. I mean, we've come such a long way from, the kind of what you described there. So much so that our customers are pushing us to innovate, on a daily basis, right? And this is just it's a paradigm shift and this is where we kind of get into the API side of the conversation and opening this platform up, because there's data at the center of this, there's information at the center of this, and whether it's for network provisioning, orchestration, and automation, or if you're actually trying to start to do, gain data insights from your network, the cloud is at the center of what's driving that, all right, within businesses for sure.
Right. So I think we probably have done a pretty good case here of explaining why the cloud has come to dominate in this industry, because of course it's not just us who are doing this now. I mean, we're pioneers in this space.
Look at Salesforce. Look at all of the other SaaS providers that they have pretty much overnight. Right. This is kind of a forklift that we've seen in the market. It's a story that's repeating itself for sure in history. We're seeing another iteration of this with a SaaS platform called ServiceNow, which is very, very quickly becoming a dominant player in the IT service management methodology. Very, very popular, over 50% market share. And it's the same playbook, right? They take things that had to run within customer infrastructure that are complicated, that have custom business logic, and they just make it easy and powerful and cloud managed.
So if we then take it for granted that the cloud is now the established way of building a network, and like I said at the outset, for Meraki, for a big chunk of the time that we've been in business, that was about taking existing products and effectively just revolutionizing them and adapting them to this architecture that we've been talking about. But then that has led us to start thinking about how we can use this data and actually plug into it using APIs. Tell us what an API is, Tony. Let's just start with the basics here.
Yeah. I mean, at the very basic sense, API literally stands for Application Programmable Interface. And in the majority of cases, although people start describing all kinds of protocols like that as an API, most of the time, and certainly here at Meraki, when we refer to an API or an API service, we're talking about a modern cloud interface that's built and designed for both human readable and machine readable interaction. And it is the building block upon which you can integrate into whatever system, platform, or service you want.
And this is not like something we're promising for the future. This is here today. We already have So how many APIs? Give us a sense of the kind of scale we're operating at right now.
Yeah. So great question. And before I do, it's a really important distinction that an API, remember the I in API is interface, is really no different than how we treat our UI or user interface. It's just purpose built for different needs, different use cases, and different criteria. Now, in terms of how many, we have 3 and growing number of API services. The most prominent and rich one is our dashboard API, which is really the analog to the dashboard, right? Dashboard.meraki.com, the user interface, api.meraki.com. That's our application programmable interface. And we have, in the last year, it's almost doubled in terms of the number of endpoints that it offers. Everything from configure 100 access points to give me the status of those 100 access points, just to give you a simple example.
So we've taken something which previously required direct hands-on access to the Meraki dashboard, the GUI that we're very proud of, right? We worked hard at making it as simple as and intuitive as we possibly can. We've grown out the features within that dashboard over the course of our time in business as customers have given us new ideas and also, frankly, some of the things they really need to be able to power their business. So what we're really saying is that we're providing an alternative way to access those features that mean that I don't have to log on myself to a computer and log on to the Meraki dashboard, click around with a mouse to set up things the way I want them to be.
Yeah, and Simon, that's a perfect way to describe it, right? If you think about yourself and what we need as humans, and you really distill this down to its simplest form, it's about data in and data out, right? So Simon, if you're a network operator, you're either trying to understand, is everything healthy? Or do I need to set or make a change to a setting? Data in, data out. What's the most sensible way to do that? Well, it used to be command line, which the irony here is that APIs in some way and sense are almost a cloud modernized version or flavor, certainly in the eyes of a network administrator or operator, as CLI, right? But as a human, a user interface is a far more intuitive approach to that because it's contextually aware. It can group and aggregate things visually, which you can't do in a machine readable format. UI is just it's the best, most optimal answer for this. Nobody wants to use an API or command line to do their online banking.
Right.
And this is where Meraki just really transformed the networking industry. But over time, as the cloud services, grew and demand for them did, and our customer base just exploded, there was this middle point where it's not just humans interfacing with our platform; it's other systems, whether that be an automation workflow or another platform, whether that be network performance monitoring platform or an alerting platform. There is this middle ground where APIs is the sweet spot for that.
So let's break those apart.
Sure.
Because we're talking about two. I mean, they are related, of course, but they're slightly different things. Which is how can a human interact with this technology through API, and how can a machine do so? You reminded me of something when you were talking there, because I think both you and I have been involved at some point in doing Meraki training. There's this training program we have here called Certified Meraki Networking Associate. And I think both of us have done a bunch of those. One of the things I remember hearing quite frequently from network engineers who are relatively new, they're lamenting a little bit this loss of their command line interface, their beloved command line interface they spent so long and invested so much of their career into. And we kind of have this, like you said, you touched on it, this kind of new iteration of that, this new concept where you can very directly manipulate what the technology is doing for you.
Yeah, and so that could be through a very simple Bash script or Python script, or it could be through a full stack application. And if you take something as simple as change switch ports on 15 switches in an environment, that's something that you could very elegantly, very effectively do through the user interface, but much faster and much more of this work smart, not hard, through the API. What's important, though, is this distinction that this newer modern approach means that you're communicating with our cloud infrastructure, which is doing the actual, taking the commands or the instruction sets and effectively and efficiently distributing those across your entire infrastructure. And that's an important distinction here because you're not interfacing directly with a switch, and you're not having to remember its IP and its SSH keying and all of that. You're interfacing with the Meraki API service, and it's a single service entity, right? api.meraki.com. You present your API token, which authorizes and authenticates you. And from that point forward, if you have full access from a permission standpoint, you are the puppet master in a sense. Right. You can literally go in and change the SSID across your entire infrastructure. And we see customers doing this. When we look at usage on our back-end services, we see customers going in and globally turn off an SSID across tens of thousands of access points in some cases, right? So Very, very different
with
approach.
Great power comes great responsibility.
That's right. That's right.
Age.
Yep. That's where, good logging and good access control comes in. But it's an incredibly high horsepower way of being able to access and interface with your entire network management stack.
This makes a huge amount of sense for, I'm guessing, like service providers, like large enterprises with distributed organizations. It feels like that's the sweet spot there. Because they're going to have these bespoke systems that leverage it, right?
For sure. I mean, if you look at the history here, the service providers and the larger organizations were really driving the innovation in the space, not just at Meraki, but overall. That said, I can tell you that we are seeing a kind of a fledgling customer persona that's starting to show up that is by no means large, but I would almost classify them as the newer version of the Meraki simple customer. Mm-hmm. And what I mean is that they're not thinking about network management and infrastructure management the way that perhaps you and I would, go into a device, change its config. They are thinking about it in a configuration as code way, meaning a full end-to-end CI/CD work stream where everything effectively configuration change management and control.
Okay.
The same way that if you're using Git or GitHub for code changes and it tracks every change, every line, every configuration change that you're making. And it's almost a layer of abstraction so that if they're wanting to in the future go to a newer model or a newer product or a newer technology, it's slot in, slot out. This is a very, very new approach to network infrastructure management. But again, APIs are right at the centerfold of that.
I think that was one of the things that I definitely wanted to ask you because, I started out there just saying, hey, this makes perfect sense the way you're describing it. I can see the advantages immediately for large service providers, large organizations. Mm-hmm. But clearly, as you said, we've definitely seen this kind of new breed of smaller customer who are using our technology in new and interesting ways. Maybe you could give us a couple of examples of it's really like the digital transformation story, right? We're actually helping to use this technology to change something for a business to make their operations more streamlined.
Yeah. So if we take a step back, when we look at how our customers are really using the API, we talked about the tactical piece, which is the data in and the data out. Another way to talk through that is really your day zero and your day one, right? Mm-hmm. When you think about network management, first you got to get the gear up, you got to get it configured, deployed, and make sure things are healthy. And then, of course, for the longevity of that deployment, making sure it's up, it's running, and that everything is smooth sailing. Mm-hmm. And if you look at the common use cases around how our dashboard API is used, that's the bulk of it. It's really about, at scale, being able to go in and do that quickly, easily, and really in as automated a form as you can. So mm-hmm. we see loads of examples where customers are working with a partner or they're working with other groups within their business, and maybe they don't want to give full unfettered access to the user interface to dashboard, and they only really want to really simplify the work stream, because if you think about when you first install an access point, it's pretty straightforward, right? It's hang the AP, make sure you document the asset or get it added by its serial number. Give it its IP address if needed. All steps that are pretty straightforward can be fairly automated, and there's very little information that needs to be gathered or collected by the person doing that.
Okay.
So you can make their lives better by making the process easier, and you can also streamline it and make sure that there's no errors made, remove, the error proneness of this as well.
The human factor.
Yeah, exactly. The fat finger, and it happens. We see a lot of customers are shifting to using the API because once they figured out, okay, these are the 10 steps that I need to take, and we shouldn't really deviate from that to install an access point or deploy a switch. These are fairly, cut, specific work streams that customers have for this. Automating that through API, that's becoming table stakes. We're seeing, nearly a quarter of our customers that are starting to use the API for some work stream like that.
And this is very similar. Correct me if I'm getting this wrong, but this is very similar to what we used to think of as scripts, right?
Yeah,
you
for
create
sure.
a script to run through a batch job.
Yep.
To get something done.
Yep, and for our network engineers, network operators, Python is the language of choice for that.
Right.
Not just because of its familiarity to Bash scripting, shell scripting, but also because of the massive ecosystem of open source solutions, packages, SDKs, and full blown solutions that are out there. In fact, there's complete full stack solutions built on Python for the purposes of network deployment. Xenos is an example that even our own IT team here uses for network deployment and monitoring, for example.
Right.
And then the other piece, which is your network monitoring and your reporting, that's the other very common use case that we see our network engineers, network operators, and IT professionals using the API for. Now, it could be as simple as an audit, right? Take, for example, if I'm responsible for managing an infrastructure with over, say, 1,000 switch ports, I prefer not to have to take this reactive approach of, hey, this port wasn't configured right. Now I'm getting a ticket in my queue because someone is plugging in and it's not working. Why not automate the auditing of that and make sure that if I have configuration drift, I'm one step ahead. So my system is telling me because it has the intelligence, right?
Yep.
This is like the nirvana for every IT admin. Like, this is what the whole the IT, was it the IT crowd?
Right.
The whole show was about that, right? Like being able to kick it, hang out with your friends while IT runs itself.
Right. Well, that's a great image. That's something every organization should aspire to, right?
And so APIs are really that's your answer there, because you can very efficiently, very effectively be able to answer questions like that in an automated form. That's the tactical, right? Now, I think you were really challenging me around, okay, what about the data out, right? What about being able to do something with the network stack the Meraki managed products that, where I can actually make perhaps business decisions based off of that.
Precisely.
And this is a very rapidly growing part of the user space around our APIs. And we're actually making a lot of investments here. It starts with simple things. For example, if you think about what an access point is, right? If you take the Meraki MR access point, it's about serving wireless clients. It's about providing secure, reliable wireless connectivity to the internet or to other services on your network. But the thing with that is it's much more than that. It's actually a living, breathing sensor. Now, by giving it cloud connectivity, we've basically created this perfect loop or cycle where while the access point is taking care of the day-to-day stuff, right? You're connecting, it's providing you access and connectivity. It's also actually a probe sensor. And this has been something that we've built in as a differentiator from the very beginning. If you go into the Meraki dashboard, and for those less familiar, if you sign in to look at your management network, the first place we take you to is what we call our clients view or our clients list. That is one very good example of how we're using the Meraki access points or Meraki products as a network probe or a network sensor.
Right.
Because you can plug that in and it starts telling you things about your network, intelligent things like
how it's being used. Right?
Yeah, how it's being used, who's connected, who's not, who was connected for how long, where they were in the environment. But opening up our platform to that data, that is at the centerfold of our API strategy, because it means that businesses can start to, in real time and over time, analyze things like, how is our business operating? How does foot traffic look over a period of time? If I'm a stadium, how many people are in the venue as we speak? By doing nothing other than deploying the Meraki network infrastructure, relying on our cloud to collect that information very efficiently, and giving you a programmable interface to be able to ask questions like that too.
And there's different levels as well with this. The way I think of this is we definitely have the option of providing a whole bunch of valuable anonymized data that has nothing to do with individual people whatsoever, but is enabling you to get a sense, for example, of how well laid out a store is. If you've got too many people at one part of the store versus another part of the store, the sort of raw analytics that we're able to get there, they're a pretty good start on their own. But then you also have this option, thanks to the API. If you do have a relationship with your customer and maybe they have an account with you and they use an app on their device perhaps, you can hook it up to CRM. You can actually start to really improve your engagement of that customer, right?
Yeah, and that's a fantastic segue into this other piece, which is around why API? Why not build it into dashboard? And there's this fine line where we don't want to overpopulate the dashboard, which is really purpose-built for the IT and network administrator to make sure the network's up, the network's running.
Yep.
We don't want to start lobbing in, the marketing view, or the customer management view or the customer success view.
That's a great point.
We want to make it possible to do that easily, quickly, innovatively. But at some point, we don't want to lose the elegance and simplicity of our network management, IT management product. And we've seen some incredibly cool examples where customers are bringing together two data sets, where it's the Meraki network stack plus, point of sale data, or the Meraki stack and CRM, Salesforce, where you're bringing together two data points that together tell a very compelling story.
Yeah. And that's really game changing. I think I love the way you put that. It's painted a picture in my mind that you really are taking the basics of providing a network, the infrastructure that connects everything together, and you're almost putting that to one side. You're saying, right, we can do that, and the network guy can take care of that piece of it. Over here, I've got an analyst, and the analyst is much more interested in footfall, much more interested in repeat visits, that kind of stuff, really trying to understand the physical environment that this equipment is deployed in. And now you've got the power to do both side by side simultaneously.
Absolutely. And I'm not saying that in the future we wouldn't provide, some views of that into dashboard. In fact, we already do, right, with products and features like location analytics.
Yep.
But there's this point where our customers are going to know their customers better than anyone else. And they're going to know what they're looking for, what they're wanting, and making the data that's available and accessible, in this case through the Meraki portfolio, open and extensible, is a strategy that not only have we seen incredible solutions get built around, but it's going to be there for the longevity of the platform because it allows for us to also then rapidly innovate here as well. We can see, if the majority of our customers are using this specific API and that endpoint, right, provides this information or this data, if we find that, 90% of our retailers are doing that, well, that tells us something, right? It tells us something about the market, and it's a really empowering data point for us as well. The other thing is we touched a bit about, data in general. But at the same time, we are, we're doing everything we can to be good corporate citizens here, and we take privacy and user privacy very seriously.
Right.
So we're always treading this line where we want to push to the bleeding edge of what you can do, but do so with GDPR compliance in mind, user privacy in mind. And we've just made a couple of enhancements even to the location API services to make it less daunting for our customers and have privacy just built into that.
It's totally understandable that we're all hearing stories in the media all the time now about how technology boundaries are being pushed constantly, and you've got all this facial recognition technology being discussed. In fact, here in San Francisco recently, that was actually outlawed, the commercial use of facial recognition technology.
Yep.
That's a pretty big news story here in this city. And, these kind of questions are going to be challenging public authorities and corporations right around the world for all of the years ahead that I can think of, really.
Yeah, and when we're designing APIs on the team, we really, really think about that intently because we want to enable our customers to get the information from the platform that they feel belongs to them and that they own. At the same time, we don't want them unknowingly stepping on a landmine either. So we're always thinking about that, especially when we talk about this data out piece. Look for more to come there as we continue to innovate out the API services.
Right. Now, just going back to something we were talking about a little bit earlier, I remember doing a presentation actually not that long ago to a room full of network engineers or network practitioners. Clearly people who, like me, have been around in this industry for quite a long time, been used to configuring gear in a certain kind of way. And I started talking to them about this concept of coding and using programming languages like Python, as you mentioned there. And, I'm not going to lie, and I'm sure we have some people probably listening to the podcast who are like, well, this is not really me. I don't do that. I don't know how to code. I'm not a software engineer. I'm a network guy. How do we sort of create that bridge? How do we entice, if you like, that sort of evolution of the network engineer? If we are making it so much easier to just get the basics of network provisioning and management taken care of, then there's got to be some exciting new challenges to be stretching towards, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, so first of all, the best developers or programmers are the ones that have mastered Command-C, right? The ones that can go in, find code base, find shared code examples, snippets, and copy that and have it up and running with minimal to no coding at all. And this is, again, touching on this before, but this is why Python is such a pervasive and popular programming language, is because almost every single day we see incredibly cool code packages and repositories get shared, not just by our own technical groups here within Cisco and Meraki, but of course by our customers. One example, there was a customer, they were migrating their switching from, I won't mention the vendor, but Meraki or Cisco competitor over to Meraki, and they had hundreds of switches. So they wrote a very elegant piece of code that dialed into each switch, grabbed its running configuration, parsed it, mapped it to Meraki, pushed the config to Meraki, and deployed the switch. It was truly zero touch, right? And it was done using several open source packages, and it required, to be honest, like a minimal additional innovation on top. So the point is that, yes, it's scary. 3 years ago, 4 years ago, I was not coding in Python. I'm still not proficient. But there's so many resources out there. And a quick shameless plug is that, we've been working closely with DevNet, really since the onset of...
What's DevNet for those who haven't heard of it?
So DevNet is an arm within, or it's a group within Cisco. They really are a developer advocate. And they are working not just within Cisco to quickly innovate on how we create open source code, contribute to the open source ecosystem, and develop good quality, delightful APIs. But they do a lot to evangelize those and within and outside of Cisco as well. And they just recently launched and mentioned a launch of an upcoming series of completely new certification tracks. These are no different than the CCNA, or CCENT, CCNA, and CCNP, or associate and professional tracks. But they are a new breed of certification tracks that are designed to answer this very question, which is, I'm a network engineer, and this pressure is growing around being able to do really configuration as code. That is the entire and sole purpose of these new certification tracks. So
what are those called? Remind me the names again.
You're testing the stretching. These are all DevNet developer certification tracks. I don't remember, but I can tell you that if you go to cisco.com/next level, which is their short URL for this, you can learn all about these new certification tracks. And they are very much the answer to that question, which is, I'm quickly being, my IT organization is quickly moving from an on-prem CLI to a cloud model, and this could include Meraki, but it very well could include other components as well. AWS, cloud compute.
That's the whole point, right? You just pick what you need.
Yeah, and I mean, more IT organizations are having to learn Kubernetes for cloud, image distribution. And so, again, it's not just the Meraki piece, but of course, Meraki APIs are at the centerfold of all of this. And Python, around with other object-oriented programming, these tracks are really purpose-built to get you to that level and get you more comfortable with it.
This was huge news at Cisco Live recently in San Diego. And if you do a search, you'll quickly find that. And so that URL Tony mentioned there is probably a very good place to start, cisco.com/next level.
Yep.
Right. And so I was going to ask, I mean, that's one of the questions I definitely had to ask today of you, Tony, is, how hard is this stuff to learn? I when you say code to me, when you say development, it doesn't sound like something that's in any way familiar to me. So, if I wanted to get started, where would I start? What does the day zero look like?
So it's a great question. I mean, and we are deeply committed to lowering the barrier of entry here at Meraki. This is a center part of what our team on the API side is all about. So we have architects on the team that put a lot of energy not just into making the APIs themselves easier to approach, easier to use, and improving the developer experience, but also putting out examples, demos, full-blown open source solutions that you can very easily take a look at, unpack, and start to familiarize yourself with how they're structured. And we've seen those, take... even within Meraki, we've got a lot of technical sellers and other technologists that like you, like myself. We weren't programmers by trade, yep. But go from 0 to 100. I've seen within sometimes months, within less than a year, they're writing fully proficient scripts that are doing really sophisticated things. We've also seen new hires coming in. And they're almost being groomed for this within university now, right? So this is not just in networking. This is happening really industry market wide. Mm-hmm. But universities are doing a lot more nowadays to help groom and enable students, so that this is not just like you're getting hit in the face with it. So we've seen students come in and pretty quickly pick up and start building and developing with their APIs. You
definitely, I mean, that's great, and that's an important development, and it should be an indication for everybody. I think that if that's happening, if the new sort of entrants into this market are going to come in enabled and speaking this kind of language already, that's great. I think for those of us who have been around for a while, you did remind me that when I have done bits of coding, it's mostly been with website development stuff. Mm-hmm. A lot of learning can be actually done by just reverse engineering what you can find out there, right? Yep. So you mentioned those code examples that exist already. Presumably you can go in and see what they're doing, but you can also unpick them and maybe repurpose them, tweak them, do whatever you like to sort of just build that muscle a little bit.
Yeah, and I would say, the different people learn different ways, right? But if you're looking purely to discover and explore the art of the possible, what are others doing with the APIs, and what are some examples of code that has been written? Meraki has a full-blown developer hub that our team updates frequently. The quick short URL for that is meraki.io. And it's rich with resources, but it's a great place to start if you're just trying to dip your toe in the water. But for those that are a little bit more, book learners, there's tons of online courses that Coursera offers, mm-hmm. and other online learning solutions offer, many of which are free. That's kind of how I cut my teeth, is going through a few of those courses, which are all incredibly good and give you a great segue into how to start to do network management, network operation, and application development with modern APIs. And it doesn't have to be with the Meraki APIs to grasp the subject.
Right. So going back to examples, real world examples, what do you think is the absolute coolest API application that you've seen up to date? And could you teach me how to do it myself? I mean, do you think you could teach an old dog new tricks?
Oh, for sure. So there's a couple that come to mind. I mean, we've seen, so the configuration parser that I touched on, sometimes it doesn't have to be a super elegant solution to be incredibly innovative, I would say. Mm-hmm. If it's saving you hundreds of hours of energy, to me, that is a job well done. Right. So that's one. And in fact, we've seen one service provider take that to another level, where beyond the configuration, parsing, mapping, and writing into the Meraki cloud for the new switches, they've gone in and they actually went in and used an open source 3D rendering utility to create a printout that they would provide the installer with an overlay that said, hey, it would basically indicate visually to the installer, like ports 1 through 10 have these things plugged into them. Make sure you plug those things into the new switch. So doing that all autonomously in code and having it generate these 3D models that were highly useful for the installer. I mean, that is, fantastic. It was just such a cool solution that we saw come out of the APIs.
Now I'm lamenting the fact that this is an audio format here, this podcast. Like, I want to show people. I mean, do we have any videos of this? Or
we have some examples of this on the developer hub at Meraki.io.
Okay.
Yeah. And then another that really is more of the solution using the data that you can get out of the platform is a recent solution that was produced by a public library where they were using the Meraki cameras, which are open and have APIs behind them as part of the Meraki Sense feature. And again, it turns the cameras into, beyond a modern surveillance product, it makes them real-time data sensors, in this case, an optical sensor that you can use to tell you in a very rich form how many people are in the frame and have that in a time series, so over time. And we saw a public library make the case that they need to make more technology investments by building, using the Splunk stack, a really, really slick-looking front end that, it's like basically like a dashboard of sorts that gives you information and insight and allows for them to see over the hour, on the hour, per library, how many folks are visiting, how many are repeat visitors, how long did they spend in which parts of the library. Incredibly cool stuff that they were able to do entirely built on those open APIs.
That's awesome. And that's also testament to what you were saying earlier, that anybody can take advantage of this. It's not just people with like huge bucks and big software engineering departments that can get involved here.
Yeah, I mean, for sure. I mean, it's a place where by having the Meraki technology, by having the fact that we're continuing to innovate and add more of these APIs to an already pretty broad portfolio of API services, we're unlocking these capabilities. And the thing is, a lot of our customers, they're not thinking about doing that when they invest in the products, right? But the feeling and sentiment that it's an open platform and you can get information into it and information out of it gives you that kind of really trust that in the future when somebody comes and taps your shoulder and says, I want an answer to this question now, you can blow their minds. Actually, wow. We've seen it many times now.
Right, so much. It's imagination. That's what I think is exciting about this. Is it's a bit like when the internet came along. You suddenly have this access to literally the world's information, and you can do so much with that. Imagination is all you need to be able to take you from step A to step B. Right.
Absolutely.
Okay, Tony, we are going to try something. I haven't done this on the podcast yet. Yeah, I'm going to throw you a few curveballs here. Yeah. And so what I did yesterday, actually, I sent out on Twitter, I asked if anybody had any topics they were interested in us covering on this podcast, cool. This topic we're looking at today. Well, you say that. I haven't asked you the questions yet. You don't know what's coming. I don't think they're too bad, but let me just throw these at you and see how we do. Chad asked a question about MQTT. I have no idea what that is, but he asked about that and our integration of that and doing so with cloud-hosted brokers. Can you talk to that at all? Yeah,
of course. So first of all, Chad, hi there, and thanks for the question. MQTT, which is a service that we offer on the camera. So it's a great segue into what we just touched on and what the library was able to do. It's a lightweight protocol designed, and it's rapidly gaining popularity for inter or intra-device communication. It's particularly useful for IoT devices because you're using the IP network, whereas formerly, if let's say you go back to a manufacturing floor, let's say you have a conveyor belt and a button. It used to be traditionally that you would hardwire those up. It would be analog. You push the button, it breaks the circuit, the conveyor belt stops. But MQTT is sort of the modern IP-based solution to being able to not just stovepipe the button and the conveyor belt together, but be able to add more conveyor belts and more buttons and have them all mesh communicate with one another.
Nice.
Really, really cool protocol, very rapidly gaining popularity in both the consumer IoT as well as enterprise IoT space. Kinetic at Cisco uses this, and as does Meraki for the cameras. Now, to answer the question, I want to make sure I get this right. The question is, do we have any ideas around a cloud variant? So the MQTT protocol, and the reason why we implemented it is so that we could allow for an application on the same network that the cameras are on to be able to subscribe to very high rate messaging. So it's a messaging bus model where the camera has information that it wants to tell an application, and that application can subscribe to what's called an MQTT topic. We actually have a few cloud-hosted providers for this. It requires a little bit of integration, but one is Hive. That is one that we found to be fairly popular. It also turns out that both Azure and AWS offer cloud MQTT brokers. So, Chad, I'd recommend looking into that. I'd also encourage you to check out the Meraki community because there's a few folks that are discussing this. And if you have follow-up questions, we'd love to see those. We always look for questions like that on the community.
Community.meraki.com.
You got it.
I love to get those plugs in when I can. Okay, next one. Nick asked us a question about really trying to get a sense, I think, of how much of what we can do in the Meraki dashboard that our customers love and have been using for many years now. How much of it have we implemented via API? And when we're going forward from here now, what is the approach that we're taking as we add new capabilities so that they are replicated as far as we can between the dashboard and the API access? Yeah,
so I'll answer this in two parts. The first is configuration. So all the tick boxes, check boxes, drop downs, and text and numerical inputs across dashboard. We have a fairly comprehensive coverage. We're not at parity, but what we've done here is very, very quickly added API coverage, especially with the intent of making sure that anything that a customer typically changes from defaults, and I'll give you an example, the name of the first SSID on the Meraki access point, pretty much everyone changes because you don't want to be broadcasting the default, which I believe is just Meraki. So making sure that we have adequate and pretty comprehensive coverage on the scaled configuration components that exist all across the Meraki products is absolutely there. Now, we're continuing to add coverage, and going forward, one of the, so to speak, stem the tide answers to make sure that we always have a parity between a UI component, a new feature, a new modal or checkbox, is to make sure that we are building them API first. Now, this is not a Meraki concept. It's a fairly modern way of building front-end applications where you, rather than, again, build a custom communication plane between the front-end component and the back-end service that's actually taking the changes and processing them, you build an API.
Interesting.
You might release it privately, but it should always, the rule of thumb is you should always build it so that it can eventually be released to public, right, to customers and users. And there's two benefits to this. One, it's a two-bird, one stone. The other, if you think really deeply about the front end that, in this case, Meraki is trying to build, you're also thinking about the front ends that our customers may want to build with the same endpoints,
That's a
right?
great point. Yep.
So it's a forcing function for us to think, really intently about how we design the endpoints. And we're very quickly moving to that model of API-first design for our for dashboard.meraki.com.
I love that concept, and that really is. Well, you nailed it really with two birds, one stone, right? If we're thinking about this stuff and we're actually trying to prioritize it for ourselves within this building, obviously that's going to be immediately beneficial to our customers as we open them up to their use.
Absolutely.
Now, Nick also had another one. He's got two questions in, but they're good questions. And this one I think touches on this concept of APIs providing essentially an abstraction layer from the sort of the very base level of configuration, enabling you to maybe configure things using different types of commands. So in this particular case, I think Nick's curious about a prepackaged interface that looks like a Cisco CLI, which of course many of our listeners, I'm sure, will have some familiarity with. It's been with us for an extremely long time. I mean, that's it's an interesting concept. How would you tackle that one?
I mean, it depends on, well, we all have a feeling in our gut when we think of or picture or say, like Cisco CLI. When I think of that, I'm thinking of a terminal window with a blinking cursor that I have a very powerful set of commands that I can use as input, and I can very quickly make configuration changes on a device. I think, like, in a way, we already have this. And again, it's Python, and you could certainly write a wrapper, and it very well could be that someone out there has already done this that emulates Cisco command line, right? So that, and what I mean by that is, if you write show CDP, which we provide the ability through our APIs to retrieve that information. Yep. But the Python package in this case, or whatever application or language you write this in, would emulate and interpret the commands that match Cisco CLI and return the data in the structure that you expected. Certainly here, at Meraki, this isn't necessarily on the top of the list of things that we would build, but it's up for any developer, and it would be, I wouldn't say trivial, but pretty straightforward to build something like that.
I can imagine out there somewhere there's somebody who's thinking about this as their life's work to take that entire familiar thing and make it really almost future-proof in that way.
Yeah, and I think so. If you look at if we take this question and interpret it with a bit more of a forward-looking angle, what we're really seeing is a few consortiums, one of which is OpenConfig, which is an initiative that is sort of looking to do what I'm going to interpret this question to be part of, which is to add an abstraction layer, right? And I think, Simon, you touched on this, but the idea of having a layer of abstraction where the northbound, is in a standard that you can, go in and bring in whatever products, whether it's a Meraki access point or a switch, and it's the same language. But underneath, or the southbound, northbound, southbound, and you're talking the Meraki REST APIs. All of this is technically possible today. And we are looking at those technologies and having dialogue with folks around this today.
That's, I mean, the possibilities are pretty much limitless. That sounds like a cliche, but it's almost true in this case. So
if there's an API, you can do it. Yeah. You can build it. That's really part of the strategy here. So
sweet. The last one I've got here is an organization called Comms Cloud. They're kind of interested. I think the way that I interpret this question is around integration with other services. So whatever they happen to be, building something bigger than you have by default. So you've got maybe your basic infrastructure built on Meraki technology, but perhaps you're using a third party for policy or for authentication into the network. I mean, we've been doing this kind of thing directly in the dashboard for a number of years now. So this is not new as a concept, but presumably APIs help us go even further there to integrate with any third party we can think of, as long as they have their own abstraction layers.
Yeah, so this gets into what we sort of started with, which is where API becomes this like umbrella descriptor for any protocol that enables an integration. And certainly there are API or Cloud API, REST API examples of third-party integrations. In fact, there's many, and you can check those out on meraki.com/marketplace, which is where we list out all of the technology vendor integrations to platform integrations that we have to offer. But when we start talking about integrations that rely on protocols like syslog, or I think there was a comment here around Active Directory, which uses LDAP as a protocol. I mean, these are services and protocols that Meraki's networking stack has supported for years.
Yep.
And beyond that, and you said this, Simon, but a lot of these are built in and are natively supported and integrated today. Another good example is OAuth, right? For user management and IDAP. I mean, these are all protocols. I would say they're tangential to API, but they're their own protocols in their own right. And if we speak the protocol, many of these we do. We are likely or bound to have not only integrations, but many of them will be native as well.
Wow, we have covered so much ground here.
Yeah, it's been fun.
Time has flown by.
We really unboxed it.
We have. Whoa, it's genius. It's almost like we thought about this. You know what's really interesting to me about this conversation? 15 minutes into this, I already realized that this is probably too much for one.
It's a lot of content.
Podcast episode. We could take this and break it down, and we may well do that. I mean, depending on the kind of feedback we get from this, then we may well be back and perhaps we unpack this in a little bit more depth. We maybe even walk through an example in sort of step-by-step mode. I think the main thing I really wanted to achieve today, or on the behalf of our audience, is getting a sense of what we're doing in this space. I think we've done that pretty well, and actually very well, very thorough. So let's get into some takeaways. I am very aware that many people who are listening to these podcasts, they do so when they're commuting in their car, or maybe they're out running somewhere if they're healthy types. Whatever it is, they may not have a piece of paper and a pen in front of them, but let's maybe give them a few sort of get started places. We talked about cisco.com/next level. I think that one was really interesting for getting into the certification side and really getting onto this whole track from a professional career perspective. What have we got on the Meraki side that gives you a kind of good starting point?
Yeah, for sure. So we've got Meraki.io. This is the full-fledged Meraki developer hub, but this is purpose-built for various personas, one of which is network engineers and network operators. In fact, a lot of the content will be geared and aimed towards you. If you consider yourselves a network administrator, network professional. There's also, and that's Meraki.io. And on that developer hub, you'll also find loads of examples, full-blown code, links to GitHub repositories, and also a link to the marketplace. If you're perhaps thinking to yourself, well, I'm not looking to go and take on a science project and have to deal with full-blown code. I'd like to have something more off the shelf, which is what our marketplace is all about.
Right, we've got both sides.
So that's Meraki.io.
Nice.
And then the community, I mean, this is one of the more popular areas for discussion, which is our API and solutions forum or subforum. Love to have dialogue there. My team is on there very frequently, and we love hearing from the audience. So
cool.
We'll look for you there for sure.
Awesome. Tony, this has been amazing. Thank you. I've really enjoyed this, actually. It's fascinating to me. I don't have enough hours in the day to get into doing a lot of this stuff myself, but I can definitely understand these concepts, and I can see how they can really help somebody who's looking to develop a career and take their career to the next level in this space to move it forward. So we're going to wrap things up now. Tony, thank you so much for taking time out to join us and our audience today. We're going to be back in a couple of weeks with another episode of Meraki Unboxed. Next time, we're going to be talking to some folks from our own internal IT organization. They call it the digital workplace. And we're going to basically talk to them about how they are using Meraki's technology, because of course they use that, how they're using it in practice. So some of the stuff that Tony touched on today, we'll be able to unpack that in a little bit more detail with the folks who are on the front line delivering the service and keeping our own network operational at all times. So just wrap things up now. This is Meraki Unboxed. We do this every couple of weeks. And, you obviously we covered some of the questions that have been fed back in here. If you've got anything you'd like to share, I would love to hear from you directly. And you can find me very quickly on Twitter at Meraki Simon. But we'd also encourage you, as Tony said, to get involved on the community side. There's a lot of great conversation there. And of course, it's very good for peer conversation as well, to understand what some other folks are going through, maybe similar to yourself. We're going to wrap things now. Have a great time over the next couple of weeks, and we'll be back very soon. Bye for now.